Broadcast now. So let's go into the broadcast mode. Hi,
Okay.
everybody.
I'm broadcasting from my
Oh, so everything I've been saying, you could hear it basically.
yes.
Okay, well, so hi, Ben. This is welcome to the show. We have Zoom with Paperboy, guest by El Chino. That would be me. So I wanted
That's
to
right.
welcome you to our little space and about talking about the mechanic of running for office. It's not
Sure.
so it's a little bit complicated because when you're running for office like Paperboy is doing, and at the same time talking about politics, it's kind of a fine line. So we really want to stay within the line of the mechanics, but at the
Sure.
same time we're going to be talking about partisanship and how partisanship and the party between the big two party, the Republican and the Democrat, what they are, and also the third party, the Conservative Party, or the Green Party, or the
Right.
Working Family Party, and
Yeah.
Independent party.
Independent, or the Independent Party. That one is a good one too, and how all these name and things like that they play games. So I mean, you used to be the secretary of the Democratic Party, so you know a lot about how it works inside. But a lot of people, when they look it from outside, they look at it as, oh, I don't want to register in a party. I'm not a partisan. I'm not this or I'm not that. And suddenly, when they want to run, they run themselves into a into a wall where they're independent. They're not registered, so they cannot do
Right.
anything.
Right.
So that's basically the topic for this week masterclass in a way.
This week's master class. Yeah. I think. I mean, you're absolutely correct in that a lot of folks don't really recognize the nature or the role of the parties in the political system, and a lot of people, as a result, are very, very disinclined to participate in the political parties, and there's really good reasons for that. But ultimately, if they want to have an impact, vote in a primary, say, or run for office, it does get them into, they do sort of run into a wall, it gets them into a bind when they're then looking for the support of one of the major parties. I don't understand that folks who've been in the party for a long time, it's not that they're necessarily about the establishment or about the elite, but think about it as like a group of people or a club that then you come in and you say you have the same principles, but a lot of what the parties are there to do off season is build relationships and build trust between particular actors. And those people in that system may be good, they may not be good, but they know each other. And that's one of the things that makes it so difficult for new people who say, but I'm a Democrat or I'm progressive, to break and don't realize that there are two things going on. One is the political ideologies that the parties profess to uphold, and the other component is just these relationships that the parties cultivate. And so they like to vote for people they know, as do normal folks, right? It's not that it's nefarious. Most people would prefer to vote for somebody they know.
So when you mentioned about, I guess, the parties making sure that the new people coming in have the same ideology or have the same type of politics as they do, at what point do you think it is the responsibility of either party, of the two major parties or any third party, but primarily the two major parties being the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, at what point do you think it's their obligation to welcome as many people as possible, simply because we live in this two-party system where if you're not in one of the two parties, you're basically not allowed to play in the game. You know what I mean? In the big game, game being our whole electoral system. So how much do you think it is their job to welcome as many new people as possible? And then how much do you think, how well of a job do you think they do of that?
Yeah, I would say that it is from my perspective, that should be the entirety of their job. The parties, their goal is to help candidates win elections, their candidates win elections, whoever that might be in some regard, but we'll get to that in a second. But the parties are there to amalgamate resources and coalesce people to win elections for candidates that represent that party. So basically to help that organization hold power. As a result, over time, they've become these sort of hierarchical organizations that work like corporations, or I guess they're nonprofits. But the point is they have this internal structure, and there's leadership, and there's people who know each other, and there's people who are working on this institution and in and out of this institution, while other people are not necessarily paying attention to these insider party politics. Now, this hierarchy on the inside leads people to feel as if individuals who have participated in the party or given to the party, that they are somehow more deserving than other people who do other things in their lives. And it's true that participating in the party for a long time or being in politics for a long time gives you a certain set of skills that might help you win an election, which is, again, one of the reasons for the party's existence. They're trying to identify people who can win elections and then help them win. But to speak to the ideological aspect, there are a lot of situations when the party completely forsakes ideology in the name of, like, I know this person, right? So from my perspective, the party should be there simply to be ideological institutions, which is how the public generally tries to perceive them. I mean, the public, I think, just very much misunderstands how the party system works, but it would be ideal, I think, if the parties really stood for ideals or something, some underlying belief or vision for the United States and for the world. And then anybody who wanted to partake or advance those policy goals would be more than welcome to participate in, say, primaries and demonstrate their mettle for office. That's not how it works, and that's these two things in tension, and sometimes they're in direct conflict to each other.
You mentioned something that was interesting to me. You said that, the public oftentimes doesn't understand how the party system works. And because of that, there's a whole lot of disdain for politics and not wanting to vote and for specific candidates and many other things. But how do you think that the people in, whether it's the specific states or the federal government or the two parties themselves, can do a better job of educating the public on how the two-party system works? Because that in and of itself would, one, I think, increase voter turnout and allow people to feel like they have more of a say. But do you think, one, I'll back that question up and say, do you think there are legitimate efforts to let people know how the two-party system works? And then how can there be more efforts like that?
Sure. I will answer both of those questions, but one of the things I do want to touch on that you said about the disdain that people have for participating in the parties because of the way they conceive of them. I very much want to just thought up or support that thought, because ultimately when people think about whether or not they're going to join a party, they think that it has to do with their ideology. And a lot of people are hesitant to subscribe to a particular ideology, and they really think that, I'm going to vote for this candidate, doesn't matter which party they are. And they think that the parties represent left politics or right politics. And to some degree they do. And in the modern day, because of what happened with the polarization and Donald Trump and all this, they do more than ever. But a lot of people who are like, I don't want to participate in the party system, I don't want to join a party, so much of it is really, they think that the candidates that come out of the party, there's gonna be some ideological difference, and they don't want to sign up for they don't want to label themselves, as opposed to say, well, these are institutions for building power, and I want to participate in power building for whichever side is more in line with what I believe. which takes me to your two questions. The first is, there's not a great effort to educate people on how the party system works. I mean, I've undertaken a fair amount as an individual. I teach workshops. I've trained thousands and thousands of people in New York and outside of New York on how the party system works. There are other places in the country where the political parties do more of that education. A lot of that has to do with whether or not the landscape is contested, right? So parties are much more transparent and inclusive when they don't have a lock-on power. But no matter where you go, in most places, you actually don't. We talk about like purple states or swing districts. Very, very few places are legitimate swing. States which are swing states are normally this county or this city is Republican, this county or this city is Democrat, and it's a patchwork of places where one party has control, and then you mash it all up, and yeah, you get a state that could flip. But usually where you are locally, one party has control, and therefore you don't experience this dynamic contest between two organizations, which means nobody is really out there trying to educate people on how it works. And the reason being that, again, these are institutions for building power. Yes, one is slightly left of the political center. Yes, one is right of the political center. But the true measure of a party, and not to cast aspersion on the third parties, a lot of it has to do with how we conduct elections in the United States, like the actual rules. But the parties are there as institutions to coalesce power and like influence. So many of the people who participate in it have their little fiefdom. They have the thing they're in charge of. They're not interested in more people being involved. They're not interested in more chaos, right? And from their view, it is chaos. You have to understand that, like, for a politician, an election is a very chaotic time, right? You could win, you could lose. You have very little insight into what the outcome is going to be, because people can say whatever they want. They'll be like, I like you, but they won't vote for you, right? You don't know that anything can happen in between now and election day. Like, somebody can come and say, listen, my top issue is the environment, but the minute there's a mass shooting, their top issue is guns. And you were good on the environment, but you were bad on guns. They changed, and now you have no insight into this. So much of politics is minimizing the uncertainty. And that's why money is great, because if you're like, I like you today, I give you $1 today, you could not like me tomorrow, but that dollar is still good tomorrow. So there's no uncertainty in donations. Political parties there then, because they serve politicians who hold this political power, they're there to reduce uncertainty, right? A lot of what they do is they have this hand-in-glove relationship with the politicians. They want to hold those seats. They want to reduce uncertainty. Sometimes, for some parties in particular, this means suppressing the vote. This means not helping people engage, right? You want to put the incentive so that having people engage is good for the parties and good for the politicians, but it's very hard. It's very hard for them to see it that way, unfortunately.
You know, wow. So there was a lot said there. I have some notes on that. But first, I guess, since it was the last thing you said, you know, this is supposed to be a democracy. We're taught as children that this is a democracy, majority rules, you know, you can have your voice heard. All you have to do is show up and vote. And, you know, you mentioned that the jobs of these parties are kind of to ascertain power and hold on to that power and gain as much as they can to get their views across. So I want to speak to, you mentioned suppressing the vote and, you know, not adding people into the process. How, I mean, at what point does it become corruption when a certain party or both parties don't want to share power, don't want to add people into the process? And at what point do we have to call out it not being a democracy and it being more of some type of, you know, dictatorship with more members? You know, when oligarchy, exactly, when certain people can't really have their voice heard and are being discouraged from their voices being heard. And then even it being like some of these old school rules of what was it, like soap tests and the tests they used to have back in the day to see if you were smart enough to vote and all of these things to kind of
like literacy.
Exactly, literacy tests and stuff like that. So at what point are we dealing with the modern day version of that? And is this corruption, or what type of things do you see, kind of to point it out to people that are maybe novices and don't understand? What type of things do you see that are kind of these barriers in the modern day to people getting to the ballot box and then being able to vote?
Sure. Well, the first thing I will say is that on paper, the United States is pretty legally democratic, like it's democracy for the most part. And I want to say that because it is important to recognize that the actual rules we have, as long as we use them to the fullest as individual citizens who can vote and participate, if we use these rules to the fullest, we actually get a pretty good semblance of democracy. What's happened is that people have withdrawn from the process, in large part because the people governing the process are so detestable. But people have withdrawn from the process and handed power over to another class of individuals. So I want to say that first and foremost, this really does come down to solution, and we can talk more about the solution in a second. But like the solution ultimately is going to come down to each one of us. Now, as to your question about corruption, I want to talk about two things here. First, corruption is the use of public authority or public power for your own personal benefit. Now, we do see instances of corruption, but that's not exactly, don't want to necessarily say like we should be worried about corruption or calling out corruption, because you can say the system is corrupt, but corruption has a specific meaning. And what we really want to do is not muddy these words, right? Because then, corruption is a lot of things, and we want to be specific, because the problem with the degradation of our democracy is that it's almost invisible. And there's so many corrupt things going on, so many corrupt politicians, that we're just calling out corruption all over the place. We fail to identify the problem of what's going on in the democracy specifically. And then the public can't address it because they think, it's all corrupt, it's all corruption. Let's talk about what's really going on here. So first, you've got your party structures, and all the parties are basically set up the same way. They are set up to be internal democracies. So while it is true that they have monopolies on power or a duopoly on power in most places, and there are some places with third parties and what have you, we can talk about that in a second. While it is true that there is these monopolies or duopolies, within those parties are democracies, right? So I was the secretary of the Manhattan Democratic County Committee. I am currently a Democratic State Committee man. Theo Chino and I are both members of the county committee in Manhattan. And the way it works is both the Republican and Democrats and many other parties have three levels. You have a national level. Not every party has a national level, but there's a few. The Green Party, the Democrats, the Republicans. There's a national level, and there's a state level, and then there's a local level. Now, at every level, there's a governing committee. So the DNC, for example, the RNC are the Republican or Democratic national committees, right? So that's the committee that runs the national party. Then there's a state committee, and I'm on the state committee. And then there's a county committee. Now, in New York, it's county, other places it might be village, town, whatever, but there's a local party and there's a local committee. Now, the question is, how do you get on these things? For local committees, your county committee, your town, village, and for state committees, all of these members all across the country are directly elected in some fashion or another. In most places, you vote for these people in the primary. So when you vote for your candidate for president or you vote for your candidate for Congress in the primary, you also vote for your party leadership. Now, the thing is, nobody knows about this. And we kind of spoke for a second about why nobody knows about this. The people in those positions don't really have an incentive to tell people. Because, I'm a state committeeman. I'm not like a powerful person, but people care in the party, kind of, about what I have to say. And I have votes on some stuff, and I can write resolutions and things that make the party spend money or change the way it conducts business. So I've got my little piece of power. And for the most part, a lot of folks who have their other lives or what have you, or they're very much invested, they're trying to climb some ladder, they're not looking to help people learn about this. They're worried that somebody's going to find out about this and run against them. They're worried that somebody's going to find out about this and run against one of their allies, or it's going to shake the boat, or they're going to get heat for creating trouble for somebody else, right? And it is trouble, right? Like if I get heat all the time. I train thousands and thousands of people, and there are a lot of folks who come to me like, why are you doing this? It makes a lot of trouble for me. Now I've got all these people who want to be on county committee where I live, or I got all these people, I got somebody running against me for state committee. I'm like, then you should be out there campaigning and doing a better job. And they just don't want to hear that. They just want to be like, I already won this. Like, why do I have to keep winning it? And yet that's democracy. I don't know. But, right, so what we have here is this it's not, it's a corruption of it's a degradation of the system, and so much of it has to do with this misinformation and failure to give information about how the system works. However, I will say one last thing, which is all of this is very much supported by our electoral rules. So much of the two-party system is a result of first past the post voting, take all elections, and geographic single-member districts, which I can explain. But if folks want to just go look them up, like that's why the United States really works the way it does, and why it doesn't work like Europe, where they have proportional representation and the parties really represent ideas and not people.
So I have a question about some of what you said. First being, you mentioned county committee, you mentioned the state committee, and then federal, and the power that these have. And we also talked about how a lot of people are not as interested in being a part of electoral politics because they feel like they don't have a voice, because they feel like the parties don't necessarily line up with their ideology, and that the party sets the ideology, not the people. So my question is, how much, as someone who is been a part of it has held party office, and is currently holding a party office, people as well, how much power do you have to change a party or to kind of mold the ideology of a party through holding party office? Because I know there's a lot of movement and talk, especially now here in Brooklyn, I'm in Brooklyn, about, county committee and, helping to take back county committee and be a part of this process. But realistically, how much power do you have to change a party's ideology by holding party office? So, and just to make it clear for people that aren't aware, the difference between party office and then actually a public office, like city council or something like that. These are two different things.
Yes, that's a really great question, and the answer is tremendous. You have tremendous capacity to do this. The Democratic Party is currently at war with reformers, right? They're out there to try and stop people from running and winning races for county committees. Their last meeting of the assembled representatives, the Brooklyn Party went around door knocking to get people's proxies. They spread lies about what people's elected officials wanted them to do. And if they didn't think it was important, they wouldn't do that. But the best example of this isn't the Democratic Party. The best example of this is the Republican Party. People wonder what happened to the Republican Party. And to know what happened to the Republican Party, just go back to the Tea Party. What did the Tea Party do? The Tea Party did a few things. And yes, ultimately it was taken over by billionaires. There was all of this, there was all this funding coming in from very, very rich people. But ultimately, the Tea Party did three things. First, it ran people for very, very small local offices, including party offices. Also public office like Water Board and Education Board, but also Republican National Committee and Republican State Committee. All right. The next thing they did was they organized and they petitioned to get people on the ballot, right? Now, I want to go back to this for a second to what I was saying regarding the chaos and the uncertainty of elections and how politicians view that as a problem for themselves. all right? The number one way to take uncertainty out of your reelection or your election is to have nobody running against you. So if you petition to get on the ballot and you can get the signatures to do that, if you organize folks and find a candidate who's willing to put their name on that piece of paper, politicians will flip out. And they will flip out because their chances of losing the election go from 0 to something that's not 0. And because politics is chaotic or uncertain, you can win even if you are not supposed to win in a fluke. Look at AOC, but also look at, Christine, what's her name, O'Donnell. And there are a couple of, now I'm blanking on the names of the Tea Party folks who were like instrumental. But ultimately what happened was they took these local elections, they got their petitioning together, and then the people who ran and won for these low positions, town, water board, education board, Republican county committee, Republican state committee, they then ran for higher office, like Congress. And a few of them won, just in a fluke, right? There were a couple of Tea Party people who got it just for one term, some of them. But it scared the living daylights out of the actual Republican establishment. So suddenly everybody was rushing to be more right? They wanted to appease this radical fringe that would challenge their electoral supremacy. And slowly but surely, the Republican Party, everybody started taking harder right stances. More Tea Party people started winning elections, and they came to the Republican Party and they started changing the platform. Now, the platform is only as good as the people who will advocate the platform. So, the Democrats saying nice things in their platform, so much of which, I like and with which I agree, it's only as good as the people who are actually trying to pass that legislation, of which there are not many. But as somebody who is in this party position, you have really three powers. And I don't mean official powers, I mean capacity for change. The first is you can do things within the party. It's true. The Democratic Party, the State Party didn't want to fund a challenger to the Felder, and I wrote a resolution that forced them to give resources to that person. And when the committee voted on it, they just had to do it. They, so much of being a party is gathering money, like having money, and people in the state committee or the county committee, they can force votes to spend that money.
Wait, so repeat what you said, because I missed that. You said that you put a resolution to make the party give resources to who or what exact? To a challenger?
To a challenger to Simcha Felder. So Simcha Felder was he's a politician. He's a state senator from Brooklyn who is both a Democrat and a Republican. And because he held the balance of the state Senate being controlled by Democrats or by Republicans, and he was giving power to the Republicans, many Democratic activists wanted to take a stand against that and to have the Democratic Party do something about this person who was a Democrat but was behaving as a Republican. And the party, because this person was a Democrat, didn't want to go against that person. They're an elected Democrat. That's good for our numbers. Why are we wasting our time taking?
Hello? I think we might have lost you a second, Ben. Hello?
Yes, I can hear you, Paper.
The party bifurcated. You got committee men and committee women.
We lost you.
Members be spent that money. You lost me.
Yes.
Yes.
You were at Sim when he controlled the he was Republican, Democrat, and the money. Just at that moment, we kind of lost you.
So the party did not want to spend money challenging somebody who was, quote, a Democrat. So in the state committee, I wrote a resolution and we got it to the floor by having enough signatories, and we voted on it, and it required them to provide support to this person's opponent. And so you have the official capacity to actually change things that the party does, if you can get enough votes for it. But again, many of these people in the party are obviously bought into the whole idea. The second thing is, as somebody who's knowledgeable about party structures, you can tell other people about them, and you can talk about experiences in the party, and you can talk about how things actually operate and how to change them. And the third thing that you can do is really, it's a political lever to have been elected to an office, because it shows that you have some number of people who voted for you. Unless, of course, you're in an uncontested election. Many of these party leaders don't run in contested elections, so they don't have their own constituencies. But generally speaking, you're seen as a community leader, and so there is some political oomph to being one of these party leaders, because your local elected officials who need to win elections where you live, they want to make sure that you're not going to oppose them, because maybe you represent a constituency and that's dangerous for them. Or maybe you'll run against them and you have a constituency and you might beat them, which is why I mentioned that story about the Tea Party. These folks, when you win these local elections, these small local elections, and in New York City, we don't have water boards or education boards. There aren't a lot of stepping stones to higher office. When you do things that build your individual constituency, it makes other politicians nervous, because now they're going to have to compete for your constituency with you if you're ever in conflict. So holding one of these positions actually does give you just some political maneuvering room and the capacity to do organizing in a way that you can't do as, I don't know, a private individual. These aren't public office, but you're sort of more out there than a normal person.
So thank you so much for that answer. I loved it. It was very thorough, and it brought up some other questions I had.
Sure.
You mentioned the Tea Party. You gave us the Tea Party example. They kind of popped up out of nowhere for a lot of people, and the media, they got a lot of media coverage, very visible, in a lot of ways led us to the current president that we have. But to using them as a case study for people who say want to change the environment, right? And want to have the environment party or something inside the Democratic Party or inside the Republican Party, using the Tea Party as a case study, how long, basically, as far as their structure, across how many local states or cities, and then how long did it take them to kind of do what they did and kind of position themselves in a place where they have a power, they have a voice, and they're running for elections. They have a bunch of people with the same type of ideology, and they kind of have this insurgent type of movement. How long did it take them to do what they did? So if you're somebody who's upset about something that's going on right now in your community or across across the country, and you have different actors that you want to place and have this type of movement, how long can you expect to kind of hit the ground running and then see the effects of your change as far as actual people in office or running for office? And I know it's kind of difficult to say because different cities and different states have different ways and different times they run their elections, but yeah.
Well, I think the proof really is in some of us. Tea Party came out in 2009, and we're where we are today. So in 10 years, it changed the entire face of American politics. Now, what did that progression look like? 2009, you've got some spontaneous groups protesting. Actually, there's no research into how the Tea Party became what it is, and a lot of it, some of it, depends on who you believe, but somewhere between some and a lot of it has to do with wealthy people coming in, wealthy interests commandeering or hijacking the movement. But what we can say for sure is that they were organized. Whether it's because they had a lot of money or because they had these millionaires and billionaires or corporate interests funding them, what we can guarantee is that these folks had the resources they need to run not the most savvy elections in the world, but just enough to get folks on the ballot and get their message out there. And then they were organized. It wasn't something that, a person did in one place. There was a national Tea Party. It was more of a confederation of smaller groups. So I'm not saying that there was like a national structure that was hierarchical like the Republican Party, but there was a national sort of affiliation of all these groups. They shared a common theme that, again, depending on who you talk to, was propagated by these wealthy interests, but it created some sort of cohesion, and that cohesion is important. So one of the examples I'll give now is like AOC, right? AOC runs and wins against Joe Crowley, who, man, I wrote a whole thing on this, but Joe Crowley was quite possibly set up to be one of the most powerful, top 5 most powerful people in the United States. And she took the head off of the Queen's machine. And my God, I don't care what people have to say about her politics. I will love her forever just for that, because it was such a dangerous situation here in New York in terms of a stifling of our local democracy by political machine powers. But that aside, AOC wins, everybody loses their freaking minds, and suddenly it's like, how can we get AOCs everywhere? That's not how it works. You don't have AOCs everywhere. You need people to run everywhere, and some of them will win, which is great. And you need those people to win to continually push other politicians in the direction you want them to go, right? So the Tea Party didn't win every election it contested. It didn't have a great track record, but because you're threatening people who have lifelong jobs.
We just lost you again. Ben, I think we just lost you again.
Ben, we lost you. Wait.
Audio's cut out.
Ben, go back. We lost you.
God damn it. I don't know what's going on.
It might be the connection is going in and out, depending on where you are.
Probably my internet. I got to say, my internet since coronavirus kicked in is just terrible. I think everybody's just using it all the time, streaming videos all day, or like on Zoom. And maybe maybe they're working. I don't know.
Right.
Yes, I think they're working.
Where'd you lose me?
But so we lost you when you were talking about AOC and the fact that everybody's freaking out, and you wrote a paper on that. Actually, that's what we and so the thing is, it seems like I will go. I mean, it seems like DSA is in a way is doing to the left what the Tea Party did to the right about 20 years ago or 15 years ago, basically.
Well, yeah. So the other side of what I was saying about the AOC phenomenon, which I think is important to understand, is that people are now always like, everybody can be, how can we find the next AOC? And the point I wanted to be clear about is, that was a very unique race, but the Tea Party didn't win a lot of its races. The Tea Party just sort of threw things at the wall and saw what stuck. And because you can win some races, you don't have to win all the races, because politicians don't like to be challenged. As I said, it's a lot of work for them, and they have to fundraise and all these other things. So winning a number of races, even if it's a small percentage of the overall total of races you're contesting, can be very, very impactful, because it will start to push people in the direction you want them to go, because they're going to try to head off the opposition. The one thing, though, that the Tea Party did have was very clear and concise messaging, and the left, DSA included, is not so good at that. And so the Tea Party mantra, motto, whatever, they had a core constituency that was willing to be fired up and vote, and they were able to reach them. The thing that the left is not so great at is that critical movement, because you do need to activate that critical minority to be engaged in these party elections, in primaries, in these local matters, that you build the bench, and also you demonstrate that this wave is coming. People spoke all the time about the blue wave in 2018, and there was a blue wave at the federal level, but the red wave that the Tea Party was, there was a huge flip in Congress. People were lashing out about Obama and the recession and all this other stuff. But the red wave that really crashed was like all these local elections that people started running for. And that shows people, that shows activism at the base and people understanding how the system works and taking control of that process. The blue wave that everybody spoke about in 2018 is everybody's going to vote Democrat, which is just not good enough to get change. That's just supporting the existing model. If you want change, your blue wave needs to be people participating in the democratic structure. And this takes us all the way back to what we were saying at the beginning, which is on paper, the United States is pretty little d democratic. It's basically a democracy, but it's a democracy that relies heavily, really, really heavily on people's voluntary engagement, right? You go back, you read all the stuff that the founders wrote, self-governance and all this. So much of the American idea of democracy is just left to the people. And if people don't want to get engaged, they don't get penalized for it, they don't get fined for it, you know. The party structure is not easy to follow the way it is in Europe. You know, I will say that every time the United States tries to export democracy, it never exports the American presidential system. It always tells people, adopt the European parliamentary system. It's a true story. And we do this now because every time we try to create presidential democracies, mostly in Latin America, they'll become dictatorships. I'm pretty sure America, France to a lesser degree, they have a parliamentary presidential fusion. America, the United States are like the only presidential democracy that's never fallen into a dictatorship scenario. And we'll see how that turns out in the next 10 years.
Well, actually, right now I don't know. I feel like we are in a dictatorship right now because Cuomo has all power. Basically, all the governors themselves executive power until. But at least in America, there is a deadline. Executive power will end on this date, and we go back to the normal way. And I feel like right now, because of the coronavirus, Cuomo has played with the election system to literally keep the incumbent in place. And I mean, this is pretty amazing what has just happened in the last since January, basically, since he gave himself the executive power. Everything has been done through one man, one voice, one decision.
No, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I don't want to get too political at the moment about it, but I want to jump on something that Ben said that brought up a question, something you said earlier and you came back to. You mentioned about the different systems and the different options that are out there as far as different types of democracies or democratic systems. In your opinion, and we're just kind of philosophizing at this point, but what are some other options that you may think that would be a more progressive way to get more people involved into our political system and to keep them, interested and kind of incentivize them to be involved? Because ultimately, right, we want to have as many voices as possible involved if we want to have a true democracy and not have the power just concentrated with those who are aware of what's going on.
Right. I'm a big fan of proportional representation, which is the idea that now this gives more power to parties, but you get a lot more parties, and it's a lot easier for voters to follow them. And here's why. Proportional representation basically says that you form a political party. Only political parties can have power. You can't really be an individual running randomly. You have to be in a party. But however many votes a party gets, that's how many seats they get in the legislature. So for example, you have 100 seats in your legislature. Well, if you get 10% of the vote, you get 10 seats. If you get 30% of the vote, you get 30 seats. And so what this does is it creates the opportunity for lots of different parties and parties that stand for specific things. So like the Green Party in the United States is like, I guess you could call them like environmental, but they're wrapped up with a bunch of other progressive ideas. other green parties in other parts of the world are parties that push like environmentalist parties. Yeah, they have some other ideas like other values that they hold, but they're there to push the environmental angle, right? Conservative parties in other parts of the world, they're not necessarily social reactionaries the way the Republican conservative parties are. They are conservative insofar as, you know, they like free markets or something. And you can have these very clean, or much cleaner, I should say, delineations of political parties. So political ideology, right? This again goes all the way back to the beginning. We're talking about how the two parties don't really, they have ideology, they have things that they're meant to represent, but because of all the people in the parties, these things get subverted. Well, ideally what you want are political parties that stand for something. And then people vote for the thing that they believe in the most. And then that idea gets represented proportional to the number of votes it got. So like the Tea Party would be a separate party from the Republican Party. The Republican Party is a free trade, was once upon a time, a free trade, pro-market, capitalist party. The Tea Party was a social reactionary, religious, Christian, like zealot party. You know, the AOCs, the progressive parties, the progressive folks of the world, they have their own party separate from the Democrats. The Democrats would be a liberal party, one that believes in, you know, civil liberties, but also probably like a market economy. And then you'd have your socialists who are into, you know, Medicare for all. And the Democrats would probably align with the socialists because they're not going to align with the Tea Party, they're not going to align with the Republicans. But this would allow people to vote for the ideas that they like and then see them represented proportional to how popular that idea was. Instead of now, what do? Well, we're fighting to have Bernie Sanders get delegates at the Democratic National Convention so that there can be a voice inside the Democratic Party that says, hey, we want some changes, but ultimately we end up with Joe Biden. That's the message we send, right? So it's proportional representation is done in other countries, and that is sort of the model that we oftentimes say that's the way to go. And then we have there's a prime minister opposed to a president, and the prime minister, a prime minister can be removed. Well, not in England anymore because they changed the rule and people are like, this is a terrible idea, but they did it. But a prime minister, you don't have to wait 4 years. The minute there's a vote of no confidence, which is to say, like, this guy's an idiot, they can get rid of him.
But you gave me an idea suddenly talking to you, and that could be a segue for later. But New York State, to take just New York State, our state,
yeah,
we have this assembly and the Senate, basically New York State, that basically is proportional to the district. Why couldn't we have New York State have the assembly, a district level, and the Senate to be literally a proportional body? That could be a good discussion for how could we better New York State and have both systems working side by side. That could be for the next one.
That's what Germany does. The biggest problem with proportional representation, now we're getting to like political theory, but the big problem with proportional representation is you don't vote for individuals, you vote for a party, right? You can't vote for the person for your city because for your city, there might not be a person running who in the party, right? So you can't, and also like you would vote for the person in your city, but then you wouldn't get the proportional vote, right? So like it doesn't work insofar as you can't have geographic representation. You have to aggregate all the numbers. 30%. Like if you get, so like if a party gets 30% of the vote, how do they represent every geographic area, right? There might not be enough seats. You know, if you get 30% of the vote, you obviously can't have one representative from every city. So that geography gets lost. The way that it works in a proportional system is the internal party elections are just so much more important. But people participate in them because they're so much more important. The party chooses who gets to sit in Congress. You have to be good with the party to sit in Congress. But being good with the party in a proportional representation model is different than being good with the party in the American model, because you have to represent the party ideals. So
Exactly.
there's a trade-off there. But what Germany does is Germany has some number of proportional representatives. I think it's something like, it actually fluctuates based on a couple of mathematical formula, but it's about 2/3 are proportional, and then 1/3 is geographic. So you have a body in Germany which is represented by geography, so at districts, and then you have other people that are elected by party. And so that's, that would be an interesting model to do. Like in New York, have one of the chambers be proportional and the other chamber be district. And to be fair, that's sort of how the U.S. Congress was meant to operate. It doesn't operate that way because of the two-party duopoly, but the Senate was supposed to represent the states, the various districts, and the Congress, the House of Representatives, was meant to represent people voting. It just got messed up.
Right.
I mean, I'm looking at the clock because I mean, we go to theory for another time because I know you have to leave at noon.
Yeah, unfortunately.
And so I mean, I enjoyed tremendously. Paperboy, I mean, you came out with a lot of questions.
I did, and I have
Great.
one last question to close us out with. And it goes with kind of our political theory that we've gotten into here at the end. A lot of what influences people, what educates people in today's political system is the media, right? Whether it be national media, social media, wherever it is, Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, this ends up becoming what kind of sets the tone for people and how they receive information. As a last question, how much power do you think the media has over our current political system and people being able to run for office? How much do you feel like the media is a barrier or propels people to be able to run for office? And what types of solutions, if any, do you think there are to kind of help to democratize the media?
Well, the second half of that is ridiculously difficult to get into because of the amount of money that flows through media. I think that the media is way more powerful than we would want it to be, particularly because it's decided to take the angle that information is entertainment and cares a bit less these days about the cutting, the hard-hitting investigative journalism. Obviously, there's still folks out there doing it, but so much of it is about clicks and eyeballs. And the influence of social media has, even though, we thought at the beginning, I am a technologist, we all thought the internet would be democratizing and wonderful. It's destroyed revenue and made it so much harder to run a really respectable media operation because so much of it is about like being the thing that people click on and then they're like, this is trash, I'm leaving. But you got the click, you got the eyeballs, you sort of the ads, right? And so the model of media has changed so much. Really, we could do a whole conversation on that. And I wish I didn't have to go because I really love talking about this stuff. And I think your questions have been wonderful and incisive. The first thing that, just to, I guess, say what I can in the time that I have is the media right now, I think, is too powerful and too influential, particularly for the incentive structure we've set up for them. I could imagine a world where the media is just as powerful and just as influential, but the incentive structure is such that we have an experience where they support democracy and they operate really as partners in civil society.
Oh, you cut. We can.
I think we lost you again. What you said, civil society was the last part we heard.
Can you hear me? I think we lost him.
Okay, I hear you now.
Oh, now you come back. Now you're back.
Well, I was just wrapping up by saying I think the biggest thing is the media in the United States has ceased to be a partner in civil society. And we could have a world where we had a media that was just as big and just as influential, but we had a better experience. right now it's too powerful for what it is. They're not a partner in civil society. They're a corporate interest, and that's the problem.
That's a great place to end it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ben. Enjoy the end of the afternoon, and we'll continue. It's a long series, so have a good afternoon.
We'll have to do it again sometime, and I'll get better internet connection.
Will do.
All right. Thanks so much. Have a good one.
Thank you for having me.